As of today, in Ukraine, according to official statistics of UN, there are 259,000 IDPs whose legal status at the moment is not regulated. On the 28th of August, they registered the draft law 4491A1, which was registered by the common joint effort of public organizations, international organizations, people's deputies, and the representatives of the administration of the President of Ukraine. The adoption of this law is very important for us, and the Ukrainian Charity Foundation Right to Protection and the Foundation to Help IDPs invited you here. So I give the floor to the regional advisor of Noel Calhoun, who is a Senior Regional Protection Officer, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Why Ukraine needs such a law? In order to get a full answer to this, you should talk not to me, but to a person who had to flee Donbass or Crimea. Tamila Tasheva will tell you more, using her own personal experience, why we need such a law. Many IDPs are now addressing us. They do not know what help they can get and what their status is. They don't even know how to call themselves. They are asking, are we refugees? Are we IDPs? Are we just displaced persons? Who and what are we? Different state bodies try to solve these problems, but the legislative foundation does not allow to timely solve these issues that are facing the IDPs. What shall we do when a person does not have a registration of their place of residence? However, a hospitable person whom they live with do not want to give them the permit to register this place. How shall they register their personal business when they don't have a residence registration, and the people and the state does not have the legislative foundation for this, and people just send them over to next office? People are coming in circles, going in circles, gathering different certificates, and it's very hard for them to solve their problems. These people are tired, they are traumatized. I know this. Maybe some of you journalists were at the railway station and saw how the IDPs register there. I was in the queue there. I talked to women in the queue, and I was asking them how they feel and what kind of help they can get. And their eyes become full with tears, and they, out of a lost, they start to cry. They start to weep, and they are in long, long queues there. The legislation shall make their life easier. Another example, we talked to a woman who came to Kiev from Luhansk with a son who has a psychiatrical ailment. He has to go through a medical commission every year to get his medical payment. And they fled Luhansk when his documents were in a hospital, and this hospital does not work anymore, as they know. They have to go through all medical checkups again, and they don't even ask for anything in addition. They just want to get what they have to get according to general legislation of Ukraine. So these examples show you a bit about how and what we shall want to reach with this draft law. The IDPs have lost their dwellings. They are torn apart from their communities, they lost their jobs, they need support, first of all, humanitarian support, in order to help them go through this very painful and most complicated primary period. Then they need some procedures in order to faster access all their social and economic rights. Ukraine is not the first country which faces this problem of IDPs, internally displaced persons. The number of these people is rising in great numbers in recent years because there are more and more internal conflicts in the world. By the end of last year, there were 33.3 internally displaced persons in the world. Last year, those were mostly Syria, Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, but this year Ukraine is added to this list. As the colleagues told us, there are almost 260,000 IDPs at the moment, and the number is swiftly rising. By the 5th of August, there were only 117,000 IDPs, so the number has doubled within 3 weeks. When this problem has started to grow all over the world, the United Nations gave a task to the Human Rights Commission to collect all the laws connected to this problem, humanitarian rights and law, and the laws on the rights of refugees. In 1998, they passed the guidelines on the protection of internally displaced persons. So there is some international experience, and some other countries have already passed the respective legislation. What are the major points in this document, the major international standards? First of all, the state is responsible for the protection of internally displaced people. Not any international organization, but the state of Ukraine is responsible for its citizens. The internally displaced persons are, first of all, citizens, and they have to enjoy all their rights as citizens of Ukraine. This means practical access, not just in theory. The ban on any discrimination. There should be no discrimination on the basis of being an IDP. Humanitarian approach, which means that you have to provide first humanitarian aid to those people in order to satisfy their needs, and then even the help in solving their problems and in looking for long-term solutions. The state has to provide people with enough information so that they are aware of the decisions that they take, and they should either deliberately resolve to go home or to stay where they are. Same concerns the look for jobs. The internally displaced persons is not a legal status. The main status in this country is to be a citizen of Ukraine, and this provides you citizens with all the rights that you should have. You should look at the internally displaced person status as vulnerability factor. They became vulnerable. They lost their dwellings. They lost their families. Probably they need special help in order to restore their forces and to put to order their personal business and personal affairs and to work as usual. So based on these principles, we have some clear-cut understanding of the law of the internally displaced persons. The major thing is humanitarian help. dwellings, food, medical aid. And this should be the first thing, because if a woman stands in the queue and weeps, the first thing that you think of is not the document about registration, but to feed, to provide a dwelling, and give this woman some time to come back to her senses. Secondly, we should simplify the procedures for people to execute their rights. This is very important in Ukraine, because if a person does not have documents, it is very hard to transfer social payments, to get a job, to register their private enterprise, and so on. This should be simplified so that people can live normally. Third, we should support people in their search for a long-term decision, either coming back or living in a new region. And last but not least, this should be done with reasonable expenses, because we want to help a lot of people, but we understand that the situation in the country does not allow for a large-scale aid operations. So my colleagues will tell you more about this draft law, but what I can say, first of all, the definition of IDPs does fit the international standards in this draft law. This is a huge positive thing. Different people worked upon this draft law. Some people who had practical experience, who were coming through those procedures, who stood in the queues to different bodies of authority. They understood where the problem is, and there was an attempt to write the law in such a way that people could really realize their rights and without wasting time. The draft law provides for temporary help, temporary dwelling, temporary help with feeding people, and the solution of different administrative problems that I mentioned. It also pays attention to the issue of long-term decision, meaning either coming back to their homes or living in a new place. But the main thing is, the time is not on our side. Why? Because people are waiting. The people who are in a railway station now, they think that there's too little time. If you go there, you see that they do not even get a paper that proves that they are registered. If you go to where they live and get acquainted with them, you will hear all about these problems from them. Over this weekend, I went to the north of Donetsk region in Svetogorsk, where there are more than 60 people living in summer sanatoria. I want to go back there in peaceful times, because there's very beautiful nature and beautiful monastery. So we stood in the forest and were talking to people living in summer sanatoriums. I had to put on my jacket there, and there are people there in shorts and in summer dresses, and a girl looks at me and she laughs and says, I haven't brought my socks with me when I fled. And I started to ask them. Told them that they could live there probably until the 15th of October or even until earlier date. So I asked them, the director of those sanatoria, what is the plan? They don't know. I asked local authorities about the plan. There's 6,000 people. You have to move them within a month and a half. They don't know. I started to ask people, do you have any plan B? Where are you going to go? And they say, if I had a plan, I wouldn't be here. All those people together are waiting for the law which will show them the way, give them sort of a assurance about what they can wait for from the state and what they cannot expect. This is very useful. In Kiev, I don't always feel this sense of urgency, but I do hope that this week I will get this feeling, and there will be a sense of the need for joint effort, and we should write the law in the best possible way. I ask everybody to have a look at it once more, because we may make amends there, but we should work efficiently and adopt the law on protection of the internally displaced persons. Thank you, Noel. I give the floor to the member of the authors group of this draft law, Alyona Shkrum, who is also the expert of... Thank you, Kateryna. First of all, this law does not have a simple history. As you know, we have a precedent when the president of Ukraine listened to the public and vetoed the first draft law, and he gave an impetus to this new law. This law was registered by MPs from different political forces and factions. It was worked upon by a working group at the Chief Department of Regional Policies and Temporarily Occupied Territory of the administration of the President of Ukraine, where representatives of public organizations were invited who are every day engaged in solving the problems of internally displaced people, also representatives of international organizations and other people. Is this law ideal? Honestly, no, but in this difficult question, we cannot find anything ideal. For the first time, our state faced this huge number of IDPs, almost 260,000, and we have to react very quickly. We have to very quickly define their rights and freedoms and their duties, and how the state can urgently help them. Because as of today, when we don't have this law, any hesitation is and protraction equals disaster. As a lawyer, I can tell you that this is the best draft law from among those that considered this issue. It embraced a lot of advice from international experience. It did provoke a lot of discussions in the public, in the society, and we tried to maximally simplify the procedure of registration, and it did regulate a lot of things. So now we have to urgently adopt it. Why is it the best? Because the very important issue for us is the exemption from taxation and customization of the humanitarian aid. At the moment, international structures cannot take the humanitarian aid through our customs, and it is being taxed to the tune of 17% of its cost. This law does solve this issue completely, and it says that there will be a simplified procedure for international humanitarian help. Then the order of the so-called registration of IDPs, not in order to count them, but in order to know how to help them in the best way, to maximally fast have the register of them, to send kids to school, to transfer all social payments here, to provide temporary dwelling for 6 months. All those issues are regulated by this law, and this is going to be our first step in the regulation of the situation in Ukraine in general. In fact, it is very important, the Article 9, all the guarantees of rights and freedoms of these IDPs. These people very often do not have anything. They just fled the places of conflict, and they could not take anything with them. This Article 9 provides for them to have decent conditions of their temporary residence, also help in transporting their belongings, help in returning them back to their place of residence, as for instance in Slovyansk, sending their kids to kindergartens and schools, transfer of students to other universities, and this all will happen on the basis of a legislative act, not impromptu, as this is done by local authorities now, by self-government bodies. There's no unification, there's no certificate for registration, no single procedure of solving this issue. This is very hard for the state and for IDPs who do not know what they can count for. And they do think that they do not get this help. It is important for us also that the law allows for free travel to the liberated zones and also to other places in Ukraine, because at the moment we have a disastrous situation when one region or one city carries the biggest burden. For instance, in the Donetsk region, there are more than 75,000 IDPs who left Donetsk, for instance, and came to temporary camps. This is very hard for one region. We should, as soon as possible, provide them with free travel to other cities and regions of Ukraine, and we should provide them maximally comfortable conditions for living so that they work, so that they study, pay taxes, and live normally, and then come back. So our appeal today for both MPs and to representatives of public organizations who were working together with us and who consulted us and provided us with their expertise to join forces and to maximally fastly tell the parliament that their political will should be to adopt this law as soon as possible, to define rights and freedoms of IDPs, and to understand that that time does not wait, taking into account the situation with the early parliamentary elections. We hope that this law will be adopted, and we will work further, both with Mr. Groisman, the Vice Premier, who in fact heads the stuff on IDPs. We're also ready to develop drafts of Cabinet of Ministers resolutions about free travel. We are open to cooperation. We welcome the cooperation that we enjoyed, but we do hope that this law will be treated very seriously and will be adopted as soon as possible. Thank you. We want also to listen to a founder and coordinator of Crimea-SOS public movement, Tamila Tasheva. Thank you very much. Crimea-SOS initiative exists since the 27th of February, from the very first day of the occupation of Crimea by the Russian Federation. We know who IDPs are. We are have been working with them from the very first of annexation. And the first people who started to leave Crimea started to leave it on the 2nd of March. So we have half a year since the annexation, and of the time when people were displaced from Crimea and from the east of Ukraine. As of May, we're also engaged with people from the east of Ukraine. We provide them with humanitarian and legal aid, and we can say that the issues of legislative regulation, if we say this in simple words, the resettlers from Crimea and the east is one of the major questions when people call our hotline, and we get hundreds of calls every week, and the issues of legislative regulation of their status as a status of IDP is one of the main questions. They don't as much ask about humanitarian aid, shampoos or pampers, but they are asking when they will solve on a national level the issues of social payments, registration, sending our kids to school, and registration is linked to a lot of other issues like the private entrepreneurship or unblocking their payment cards. These issues cannot be solved without legislative regulation. At the moment, the issue, several departments are responsible for the status of IDPs, and the public organizations and the international organizations are going from office to office and cannot very often solve an issue in one office. A lot of my colleagues think that by adopting this law, we would at least stimulate state bodies. You know, when they have one law which regulates this issue, they can start to do something in this direction. In April, there was a law adopted about the rights of people on temporarily occupied territories. We know that after the adoption of this law, some norms and regulations had to be adopted, but not all of them were adopted. And so now the adoption of the law on the status of IDPs is important, and the work will continue because the law is not a panacea, but this is, of course, at least a beginning of the things that we should do. For us as public initiatives, it is very hard without this law. I'll repeat, a lot of issues is linked to this. People call us who cannot unblock their card accounts. You know, they in Kiev or Kiev region, when they go to the center of registration at the railway station, Noel told us about this, they are given just a sheet of paper with a number of registration in the journal, in the register, which is handwritten by some officials. Then people try to transfer their social payments, and maybe they find a job in another region, and they go to another region, and they have to once again go through the same procedure to get registered. This is not normal in the modern world, and in the world of modern technologies, where you can do this with one click. At least the transfer of social payments can happen very quickly. But we, in reality, have the situation when social payments are being transferred from the east or from Crimea during 2 weeks, takes them 2 weeks. So when people come here with a bag or just one rucksack or without their socks, people do hope that the state will pay them at least something, at least gives them some money for their kids, because the academic year has started. And when people just want to buy some notebooks for their kids or textbooks, and they cannot give this paper to a bank saying, I am an IDP and I have a number of registration, please help me. So I want to tell you that, for instance, they do not have registration in Kiev, and the procedure here is very complicated. We're talking about this issue a lot and regularly, for instance, during the sittings of coordination staff. This is very important. It should be regulated as well. So I consider that the law is the first swallow of what should be done immediately. It will be very hard without the law later. If now we have 260,000 IDPs, and we think that the number will grow by winter, and there's a new wave of resettlers from Crimea because there's a very complicated social and economic situation in Crimea, and people from there do not go for better life to Russia because it is not close to them morally or aesthetically, so people come to Ukraine for some earnings, and there are more and more such people. So I do hope that MPs and the Cabinet of Ministers will heed the public and international public, and this law will be adopted. Thank you. I give the word to Flor Boris Zakharov, one of the authors of this draft law, and he represents the Kharkiv Human Rights Group and Ukrainian Helsinki Union. A bit about history and philosophy of the adoption of the development and adoption of the previous law, which was vetoed by the presidents. The Kharkiv Human Rights Group in March started to develop the law on IDPs, internally either forced resettlers or internally displaced persons. This law was published on the 15th of April, and since then there was a public discussion about this draft law. We worked with the Office of the UNHCR, and within a month we have finalized the work on this draft law, but it did provide for a great amount of expenses from the budget, so the MPs within one day decided not to consider this draft law, and they submitted an alternative draft law which was not discussed with the public. And on the 19th of June, a draft law was accepted. I think it was dangerous because it just did not solve the problems, but also carried threats to rights and freedoms of IDPs. That's why public organizations addressed the appeal to the president with a request to veto this law. He heeded the public opinion and did this. After this, the administration of the president initiated the creation of a new draft law. Unlike other draft laws, this draft law has a different philosophy. For instance, the chief body that is responsible for IDPs is the Ministry for Social Policy, not the State Migration Service, as in other draft laws. Other draft laws are mostly directed at controlling IDPs, monitor their travel, and stop the threats to national security in this sphere. The draft law developed by the expert group of the administration of the president aims first of all at the protection of rights and freedoms of internally displaced persons. There are procedures of registration convenient for IDPs, procedures of social aid, the right to choice, and there are open opportunities to provide humanitarian and charity help to IDPs from international organizations. Thank you. Thank you, Boris. On Skype, we have the first deputy head of the Donetsk Regional State Administration, Mr. Ilya Shevlyak. Can we switch him on? Can we see him? Can we listen to him?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Can you hear us? Okay. The first deputy head of Donetsk Regional State Administration, Mr. Ilya Shevchuk. Yes, we do hear you. Can you hear us? Good afternoon. We would like to invite you to take the floor. Good afternoon to everyone. I thank you for inviting to participate in this important discussion. First of all, I would like to thank the authors of the draft law, the experts, the NGOs which were involved into the drafting. Can you hear me? Yes, we can, but with some delay. Can someone help us technically? Can you turn off the broadcasting? Just have the Skype on only. There's some broadcasting over there. Could you switch it off? Let's try it again. Sorry. Again, good afternoon. Can you hear? Yes, we can hear you perfectly well. Again, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting. Thank you for wonderful draft law, to all the authors of draft law. I believe that's unique situation, the possibility when the draft laws are developed by the experts who understand things. In Donetsk Oblast, in Donetsk region, we have been discussing the issue of IDPs, and that's very topical issue for us. When you mentioned 57,000 IDPs, but during the last 2 days, the situation has changed. We have more than 65,000 IDPs in average. That's 1,000 persons more. And what you are discussing now is really very, very important for us, for our region. I would like to mention that looking at the draft, I do not just welcome the fact of passing the law, which is so important today, but I also would like to mention how systemic and comprehensive this draft law is, which includes all the key issues related to IDPs. I believe that the biggest positive in this draft law is the fact of legislative regulation of the status of ADP, and that will allow to ensure rights and guarantee social protection for these persons. We have mentioned before during our governmental meetings the introduction of the United Register of IDPs. The novelty, and its important novelty, is approving of a separate program for IDPs. That is very important because most issues are within the local authorities' mandate, and I believe that taking into account the fact that the local authorities are working on IDPs, are responsible for IDPs, and they've been doing that for 3 months already, but without the state support it will be impossible to resolve that problem comprehensively. Another important fact is fixing the internal displacement, which is confirmed by a certificate, and we've mentioned that certificate already. If the draft law is passed, then finally this issue will be resolved. I would like to draw your attention to the fact, to Part 3 of Article 4, which provides for where we need to add the local authorities, because it talks only about local state administrations, and we need to add other bodies here. And also it is very important to fix the powers of the central authorities, Ministry of Education and Social Insurance bodies. We talked to the Ministry of Education today, and thanks to the efforts of the Ministry of Education, there has been a resolution passed, and we did not have the third stage of external assessment. It was we immediately went to the entrance exams, but many students had no chance to enter other universities which are outside of the ATO zone, those who graduated the schools in ATO zone. But I believe that the students or the applicants from Donetsk and Lugansk regions will now have the chance to get the higher education. And also talking about returning the IDPs home, we need to look at the issue of residential housing and two more issues. Talking about the text of the draft law, in part 6 of Article 4, it provides for the list of the information that the applicant gives in his application, and we do not understand what does it mean, the declaration that the person wasn't involved in the commitment of the crime. If by that declaration you mean some statement, or should that be some certificate which is signed and confirmed by some institution, we need to clarify that. And also the issue of free provision of food is also important, but nevertheless, if we adopt the national program, that will make life easier for those who work with IDPs. And the draft law also has a position on regional programs of restoring, building, or acquiring housing. We understand that the regions do not have these resources, and it would be correct to have also a state program on building or restoring of such housing. And in the end, we don't have time for discussion, but it would be feasible to adopt a wonderful draft law in the first reading and in general. And I hope this will happen in the nearest future. Thank you, Ilya. Allow us to answer your question on part 6 of Article 4. By declaration, is what is meant is the declaration, the statement made on behalf of this person that I, such and such person, have not committed any crime on the territory of Ukraine. I would request you to stay in with us, because maybe there will be some questions to you as well. There's some meeting planned with the international with some organization, and it's about winter period. I would like to thank you for this opportunity, but I will then view all these materials in the end of our meeting. Thank you. Now I would like to invite Alexei Savchenko, the representative of the presidential administration. Good afternoon. I would like to mention the attempts of the presidential administration to do all the actions which are related to the executing the functions by the president of the guarantor of the constitution, the guarantee to all the citizens of Ukraine. I have the honor to present our creative group. We involved into drafting this law. We involved the representatives of 6 different departments of the presidential administrations, and there were sociologists, political study specialists, and lawyers and other specialists who are related to national security issues and defense issues. At the stage of drafting this, of developing this draft, we initiated, maybe many of you remember that we initiated the roundtable, which was held on the 8th of July this year, and about 100 persons participated in it, and they were representatives from different ministries, agencies, international organizations, public organizations, and representatives of local authorities, regional administrations, who at that time experienced the problems which required legislative regulation. Now we have a certain conflict of powers of different institutions and bodies of the authorities, which are related to the exclusive sphere of competence in different sectors, and they're working on that. But when people, when they find themselves in such difficult conditions, when they address these bodies, these agencies were able to provide some services only within their own competences and powers. The lack of certain coordination, despite the attempt from the Cabinet of Ministers and the President of Ukraine to regulate and to speed up the actions, does not allow to efficiently implement the mechanism, because according to the Constitution, the local authorities have the right to act only within the order and by the methods stipulated by the legislation of Ukraine. Understanding the necessity of legislative regulation and widening the powers for such bodies, we envisage in Article 10.11 of this draft law the expansion of certain functions and powers of these bodies, as well as the necessity to for the Cabinet of Ministers to coordinate and control the implementation of the provisions of the draft law in order to speed up and facilitate the joint activity of IDPs and the local authorities in direction of providing information and services to them, as well as control over implementation of the norms of the draft law. Talking about novelties of the draft, I would like to mention that for the first time, the mechanism of confirming objective circumstances is introduced, the circumstances which became the basis for displacement. And it mentions the official websites of international organizations, the organizations of United Nations, OSCE, or UNHCR, International Red Cross, and that is done in order to make easier the life and legislative actions when the IDPs, without having certain documents, maybe sometimes the country occupant specially destroys the documents, but there needs to be some confirmation that they have a right from these regions and they have the rights for some social services. We would like to mention that some novelties of this draft law unlike other draft laws, are the creation of the single state register, which has to ensure not just statistical gathering of the information about IDPs, but to statistically process it by certain services and bodies, the State Migration Service, but also it means much bigger ideological grounds for such provision. We mean the creation of the information comprehensive system, which will become the system, expert system, to help make managerial decisions by civil servants and the people in local authorities, and also for IDPs, because according to this expert system, using the data of this expert system, they will be able to see what are the opportunities to find jobs, what social services could be provided or educational services could be provided for them. Also, they will understand what could be the best place for their temporary staying. This draft law introduces the idea of the comprehensive set of issues which will allow the citizens of Ukraine who move to other places better get adapted to the conditions, and we believe that is the function of social adaptation. We understand that those 260,000 people who are the citizens of Ukraine, who are in a very difficult psychological, social, and material conditions, they have to get from the state and from all its bodies proper social, economic, and political protection. So, besides creating this information basis or register, where there are some specific features related to the access to it by different bodies and organizations on a free of charge basis, and functions related to setting up and commitment taken by the Cabinet of Ministers as to actions and development and passing of the comprehensive governmental programs which will ensure the rights and freedoms for the citizens of Ukraine who became the IDPs. We know quite systemic steps of the Cabinet of Ministers, which passes different resolutions, but we believe that the Cabinet of Ministers has to be able to create the legislative basis, and the whole idea of mutual coordination between the authorities and international institutions as well as NGOs is to be regulated. As to the powers or functions which were to be changed in Article 10.11 of the draft, we suggest specifically in which direction each body which ensures rights and freedoms has to execute its actions. We mean the State Immigration Service, the Ministry of Social Policy, Ministry of Education, Health Ministry, Pension Fund, and so on. Everybody is provided with the right and duty to exercise certain actions on which such provision of rights and freedoms to the citizens will depend. A lot of attention is paid to the issues related to providing for young people the proper conditions of living, because they are the most vulnerable part of population and the category which will for the rest of their lives remember the conditions in which they are now. That is the future of Ukraine, that is the potential of Ukraine, and the attention to children, to students, to teenagers is important for the future demographic situation in Ukraine. We know of some historic consequences that differed east and west, north and south, talking about mentality, talking about historic gaps, a historic aspect of creating mentality in different regions. Now we see the unification of the nation because of this forced displacement. People get more information about the culture of each other, about the history, and in this law we are trying to provide for this factor to achieve unity of the nation. When drafting the law, we took into account some international recommendations, international laws and ruling principles, and in this case, and terminology and legal approaches taking into account international experience, this all was regulated in this draft law. It is important to stress the issue of providing housing, understanding the economic situation and circumstances in which Ukraine is in the result of the military aggression and hybrid war. We suggest the idea of creating the mechanism which would provide loans for building the housing, or according to the simplified procedure with certain benefits, providing loans and interests for mortgages, especially to IDPs. So we are talking about the whole set of rights, and one thing the IDPs have to do is to state about themselves. We have 260 only officially registered IDPs, but we understand that their number is much bigger, maybe 2 or maybe 5 times bigger, because many do not register because they do not know what is the procedure, or maybe they don't want to feel all this experience of long lines when they are given only the number of registration without any further explanation of their rights. And the law is trying to address these issues and provide to the state and to the citizens all the information about administrative services which could be given to citizens. Such a status of the citizens will allow them in the future to exercise social adaptation, to find jobs, to find housing, to create the conditions for their relatives, especially children and elderly people, I mean grants, stipends and pensions. This mechanism will allow the state to know what's the number of IDPs, the real number of IDPs. So we create this mechanism when both sides are interested in exercising certain actions. which eventually will enhance the economic efficiency of activities of such persons, which will allow them to fully get integrated into different spheres of the economy, to increase the GDP, and so on. A special role in this draft is paid to international cooperation, because from the times of passing by previous authorities of the tax code named after Azarov, that's an obstacle in getting humanitarian, charity, international technical assistance. That's an obstacle for the state of Ukraine and to IDPs. The main obstacle here is the requirement as to payment of 17%, depending on the level, the income tax for any charity assistance which citizens may get, understanding that many of them have blocked banking accounts, have no jobs, which makes it impossible for them to get such charity assistance. Also from the point of view of potential donors, investors who are ready and who would be ready to do something, but these are the requirements of the law of Ukraine, and from their point of view, these are not perfect, and understanding the legislation of their countries, they also have the problem in sending such charity assistance. So that draft law has the idea related to simplification and depriving of any taxes and duties. There's this system. The system is set up to speed up such assistance, and there's the idea related to necessity after getting the humanitarian assistance to properly redistribute them between different groups of IDPs. So that the situation is not like into one place they say syringes and to another one the medicines, but the syringes are not needed without these medicines or whatever. And that is true talking about other types of humanitarian assistance, clothes and food products. They should be distributed correctly. And so this information database stipulates for a wide system of databases which will allow to control, distribute, have information, technical computer instruments directed towards reaching these objectives. An important role in the draft is paid to the final provisions, because the legislation requires certain amendments. The working group has drafted 3 more drafts as to introducing amendments to the tax code, customs code, and the issues related to some other directions of simplification of customs clearance and other issues. Thank you, Alexei. Unfortunately, the time is over. And also issues related to providing, to giving instructions to the Cabinet of Ministers on regulating some issues by their resolutions and bylaws. Thank you for attention. Thank you. Unfortunately, Andriy Shevchenko failed to join us. He's one of the authors of this draft law, so we will finish our press conference. And in the end, we would like to say that it's great that for the first time we so actively involved the experts from NGOs, from international organizations into legislative drafting, and they together managed to develop this wonderful documents, draft law 4490A1, and we want to believe that that was not this work wasn't done to be wasted. Unless you have any questions, thank you all. Goodbye.